So hey all at YouTube, this is Silver Lightsaber, and I wanted to try something special this time. I have my new friend ShadesAtKnight joining me. So say hello, Shades.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Yeah. So yeah, we've been sending messages for the last few years actually, and
Yeah.
finally connected outside of YouTube, and we're both huge comic fans, comic movie fans, and the one thing that we found that, I mean, we like a lot of the same things. I mean, don't we, Shades?
Indeed, we do. Yeah.
So the one thing we found is that Shades is a huge Hugh Jackman fan and a huge Cyclops fan, a huge X-Men fan, and I go off on occasional X-Men rants, and I'm a huge fan myself, so we figured the best thing to talk about in a crossover would be the X-Men film series.
Yeah. That's logic.
So this first video is going to be talking about the first X-Men movie back in 2000. And so to get things started off, I guess we should just start with a simple question. How did you enjoy the first X-Men movie?
But as a kid who was a big fan of the animated series in the 90s, I was just over the moon when I found out that film was coming out. I remember seeing a billboard for it, not knowing that they were making a movie, and flipping out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and like it was also really big back in Australia because which is where I'm from, in case you guys don't know that. But it was big in Australia because we had an Australian in the lead role, and Hugh Jackman wasn't really a big name at all, even in Australia back then. So it was a big deal, So, of course, I saw the film opening week, and still to this day, I really, really love X-Men 1. X-Men 1, I feel, is somewhat somewhat underrated these days, because, we've had, two films since then that everyone agrees are good X-Men films, and so many comic book films since then that I feel like X-Men kind of gets forgotten about a little bit. But
definitely.
yeah, and I absolutely love the film, and I always will.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that it's underrated, because everyone always goes on about X2 being their favorite, and while that's a really great movie on its own right, probably one of the best sequels around, actually, as far as good comic sequels, and a sequel in general. The first one is my favorite out of the series because the sheer excitement about the first one, and like you, I was ecstatic when I heard that it was coming out, and but the biggest thing that I really love about the first movie that I don't think any other movie's really done since then is the tone. The tone was very different from the animated series, or even from a lot of the comics that I remember reading. And I didn't read too many, to be honest, but I did read some to get familiar with it. And the tone of the first movie seemed very eerie, offsetting. It made you feel kind of like the humans in the film watching these characters. It was very, I don't exactly know how to describe it, kind of eerie at times. The musical cues, instead of it being very heroic and very, these are our heroes, it's very, no, these are strangers, this is a scary time. And the other movies seem to really pick up where the first one took it by introducing a very strange world and saying, okay, you know these guys, you know their problems, now we're going to have fun with it. The first one seemed to really deal with a lot of the baggage. I think that's the reason why I love the first one the most.
Yeah, I mean, the very first scene, like the intro to X-Men 1, with Patrick Stewart's voiceover and that the theme, the score kicking in, I just saw it on YouTube. It was just in my recommended videos for some reason, and saw it, and I just thought, man, that is such a good opening. Even before the stuff with Magneto in the camp, and that the score is so, like you said, it's eerie. It's not heroic. The entire score soundtrack is not heroic at all, and it's this is the tone that I love the most out of all the X-Men films. They feel like a secret. That's what I like about this. The X-Men and mutants as well are still very unknown. And the X-Men feel like a secret agent type of deal, and obviously they're not, but their mystique is not to be confused with the character, but their whole mystique is really great. And
Yeah.
to me also feels more about the X-Men than any of the other films. Obviously, we'll get on to how, you know, characters like Wolverine were really pushed ahead of any of the other characters. But to me, it's not an origin story, but it's still more about the X-Men team, in my opinion, than any of the other films.
Yeah, the first film did a really great job of kind of bringing in the comic fan and introducing the normal moviegoer who knows nothing about the characters all in one swoop. And for that time period, it's important to keep in mind that that's right after Blade, that's right after Batman and Robin, when superhero movies really weren't cool. And
Exactly.
The only success you had was Blade, and this X-Men film really opened the floodgates for Marvel to release movies like Spider-Man, and the boom in that period with movies like Daredevil and Hulk and Fantastic Four, and it just went on and on. But X-Men was really the movie that started it. Yeah, I think that the film did a really great job of paying homage to the comic roots with certain like sticks and jabs at things, like a little banter between Cyclops and Wolverine, just little things that only comic fans would know. Like the tensions between Cyclops and Wolverine were played well, and it's probably the best X-Men film with Cyclops just because of his screen time, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah.
But
the yellow spandex line is
that's what I was getting
is
to,
one of
yes.
the best lines ever.
Yes, it did a great job jabbing the comics while paying respect to it. With it balanced a lot of things, didn't it? Like with Xavier and Magneto's relationship, Wolverine's lost memory, all the while introducing the concept of mutants and trying to make it modern. The X-Mansion, the idea of the X-Men, the Brotherhood, it was balancing a lot of stuff that I don't think many people think about nowadays.
Yeah, the fact that it was a school as well, instead of, you know, just a bunch of mutants, like, you know, 5 mutants or whatever living in the mansion. It was a school.
Yeah.
I really loved that. At the time, I'm not sure if in the comics at the time doing that, but I mean, certainly I was more familiar with the animated series than I was with the comics when the first film came out, and
no, myself included.
I was like, wow, there are all these kids at the school. This is interesting, and I got to admit, I'm not sure if the X-Men film started that or not, but I mean, it's certainly been popularized in the comics now since then.
Yeah.
I mean, they've definitely had, you know, groups of kids living at the school in the comics before then, especially with, you know, characters like Kitty Pryde and Jubilee and that. But and of course, the X-Men were teenagers when the comic was originally started in the 60s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I there's so much about it that I really love. The fact that the X-Men are teachers. It's funny. I've had a little bit of a look at a screenplay that did not make it to the production. I guess Singer and company revised it before shooting, but
Yeah.
It's in my library at my film school, and I was looking through it because I didn't know that it wasn't the shooting script, and suddenly I see Beast in there, and there's the Danger Room, and I'm going, what is this?
Yeah.
And it's funny how many script revisions X-Men went through. I mean, even Joss Whedon wrote a script, and you know, Whedon's run on Astonishing X-Men is my favorite comic book X-Men stuff ever. So I would have liked to have seen that script. Apparently, one line of dialogue of his is kept in the film, and believe it or not, it is the Toad getting struck by lightning line, which is not a good line, but
not the best.
It's Joss Whedon.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because this movie had a very interesting production history, as any superhero movie does. I mean, it goes from producer to actor to you name it. Every sort of change you can imagine with a big blockbuster happens with superhero movies. But yeah, James Cameron was in line to make the movie.
Yeah.
I think in one of the first with Carlco Productions, who I think made the Terminator 2 movie. And yeah, the script went through a lot of changes with Joss Whedon, a lot of different tones and a lot of different aspects they focused on. I think it was Bryan Singer who took the project, who originally didn't want to do it, and actually turned it down and didn't really like comics. openly admitted that and wasn't familiar with it, didn't grow up with it, and he went on to do X2 and Superman Returns, and ironic. But anyway, he took the project just because of the ideas and the themes, and he really, I think, molded the universe, his universe, more around the idea and the concept that he found interesting, rather than focusing on being loyal and working with a straight adaptation from the source material. He was almost like Tim Burton with the '89 Batman, where he took the elements that he could really relate to and he really liked and shaped his own version, his own vision around that. And I'm sure he had people around him who kind of reeled him in and said, no, you can't do that. That's going way too far against, what people will accept. And then he had other people around him saying that's a great idea. But I think he did a great job molding his own vision and what he could personalize with in making the movie, because I think with some filmmakers, they fall into the trap of being way too loyal to the source material, like Zack Snyder and Watchmen, for example. That's another video. But I love that Bryan Singer was able to really create his own adaptation instead of trying to be as loyal to X-Men #1 as you can, which honestly I don't think would make as good of a movie.
Yeah, no matter what anyone wants to say about Bryan, they think about Superman Returns, whatever, Bryan Singer is a great filmmaker, and he's a very hands-on filmmaker. He produces, actually I'm not sure if he produced X-Men 1, but he definitely wrote the screenplay that eventually made it to the big screen. He's very hands-on, and he watched every episode of the animated series as well before directing this.
He did do his homework. He did do his homework.
Absolutely, and it's that's why characters like unfortunately it's cut from the film, but Jubilee is in the school wearing her yellow coat and the big earrings and that sort of thing, and
that's right.
it's on the X-Men 1.5 DVD, and when I saw it I went, oh my gosh. It was just I was shocked to see Jubilee just out of the blue looking exactly like Jubilee.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Bryan Singer, and like you said, he turned this down. He went, comic book? No. And Tom DeSanto, the producer, really convinced him that this is something that you should really look into, and thankfully he did, and he put together a great cast. Casting is an interesting thing to talk about because, I mean, Hugh Jackman wasn't even hired when they started shooting. They had Doug Reed Scott. I think his name was Doug Reed Scott. He got signed for X-Men, and then he got signed for Mission Impossible 2, and went, well, I'm going to drop X-Men and do Mission Impossible, which, you know what, at the time probably sounded like a damn good idea. But
that's right.
It's funny how Hugh Jackman's career has kicked off, and is one of the biggest stars in the world, and Doug Reed Scott is in fact that guy's name. So,
I think that the role would have been very different if Scott had played the role, and I don't know for certain if, in fact, no one can really say for sure, but I'm pretty certain that Hugh Jackman really had a big part in making that role as popular as it is, because Wolverine was already everyone's favorite X-Man, I mean, for years up until that point. And Hugh Jackman really captured the role in a way that other actors before him in superhero movies kind of became the character, but still were able to have great careers afterwards. Like Christopher Reeve's Superman comes to mind, or later with Christian Bale, which came afterwards, and as Batman. Certain actors take the role and they really embody the character and do something new with it too. That makes people re-interested in the character more than they were before. And I think Hugh Jackman was right for that role. It was just the stars aligned, and I think even though it was 3 weeks into filming when he was cast, I think it was meant to happen that way. And aside from Hugh Jackman, other interesting casting choices were made, like Patrick Stewart as Xavier, a dream choice. I can't imagine anybody else who would have played Professor Xavier.
I've heard a really great story. Patrick Stewart had come into, I'm not sure where it was. I think might have been Fox, their offices, to do like a voiceover or something for whatever project he was involved with at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Richard Donner actually said, go down the hall to my production company and go see my wife, Lauren Schuler Donner, who, for those of you who don't know, produced all of the X-films. She held up an issue of the X-Men with Professor X on the cover, and Patrick Stewart replied, "What am I doing on the cover of that book?" So he was totally on board, and which is really cool, because I know he's said in the past, he's done so many sci-fi films, even though he's such a great theatre Shakespearean actor. He's done so many sci-fi projects that they kind of litter his career, but he's so great as Professor. I'm the same. I could not imagine anyone else, to the point where when First Class was coming out, I was going, freaking McAvoy's not going to be able to. But I mean, and we'll get to that eventually. I thought McAvoy did a very good job, but I mean, Patrick Stewart is Professor X to me.
Yes, he embodied Professor X. The casting for this first X-Men movie is great. I don't think there was a weak link in the cast. I think the writing was the weak link at points, not the cast itself. But going on with great acting choices, you mentioned people with great acting chops. The person he played against, Ian McKellen, that was also fantastic acting, a fantastic choice. And he was pulled into the project similar to Bryan Singer because he is a strong activist for gay rights, and he's a proud homosexual in Hollywood. He there at every pride parade and everything, and he took the role because he could connect with it, and he loved how the story kind of shaped a Martin Luther King Malcolm X dynamic with the two characters playing off of each other, and it shows on screen, because those scenes with Xavier and Magneto, I mean, they're still talked about today. I mean, that chemistry between Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart is classic.
Absolutely. I remember when I first saw the film, I thought Magneto looked a little bit older than I thought he would, being a child and not really knowing who Ian McKellen was. But I mean, he's so great. His voice, himself, he doesn't look out of place in the helmet and the costume and things like that.
Which is very easy to do.
Oh yeah, I mean, you put that on any other Shakespearean actor, it's not going to look right. But McKellen just sells it, and he's brilliant.
And everyone else in the film, I think, was cast just right. Those names are what comes to mind as being like picture perfect. Those big three, Jackman, Stewart, and McKellen. Everyone else, I think, was cast just right. James Marsden as Cyclops, who was great.
James Marsden's one of the most underrated actors in Hollywood, and he is incredibly talented. If you've seen any of his other films like Enchanted or Hairspray and things like that, I mean, the man just bleeds talent. And if he had done those films before X-Men and then was cast as Cyclops, I would have been very confused. But I mean, he's so good, and he doesn't get to give the performance that I'm sure he would give today, and he has talked about wanting to play Cyclops again just recently, which, hey, I'm all for that.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I mean, Fox clearly don't have enough stock in Cyclops, which is a shame. But but I really like what Marsden does. My favorite scene is when he talks to Xavier.
They touch a lot in that scene,
when he's talking to Xavier after being knocked out by the poisoned Cerebro, and then running after Jean in Cerebro, I love that. Marsden's great. Yeah,
Marsden does a lot with very little in that movie, and all the while paying homage to the comics and the mythology that the fans are familiar with. The moviegoers might not be, but he does a lot with a little, and I think that it really shows to fans even today. And he was just right for Cyclops. And
I remember Bryan Singer saying on the DVD that he was another actor that was cast late in the game. They had Jim, I'm trying to think of his name, is the lead actor from that show, Person of Interest. Jim Caviezel, something like that.
Yes, played Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ.
Yes.
Jim Caviezel.
Jim Caviezel, yes. He was cast as Cyclops, and you know what? He probably would have been pretty good, but when he left to do Frequency, Dennis Quaid, and Singer said he cast Marsden because he was so expressive when his eyes were taken away. Because believe me, as an actor, when your eyes are taken away from you in when you're trying to give expression, it's very hard. And Marsden doesn't, it's especially visible in X-Men 2 just how expressive he is. With the visor on, but I could go on and on about how much I enjoy Marsden's work. So
I think that's another video in itself. But Marsden was very good in X-Men 1. Great casting choice. I would be interested to see how Caviezel would have done, because I think that any actor who can pull off playing Jesus Christ, God Almighty, can probably play Cyclops. I mean, come on. But that aside. Other casting choices that were interesting and that worked, like Halle Berry as Storm, who in the first film had, I think, a slight African accent. So I think they were leaving open the possibility to leave her backstory in, although it was ditched in the next films. But I thought she was fine. I mean, I don't think it was a standout performance in her career. It was definitely noteworthy to be in a movie like X-Men that was a big franchise for her. And then other actors like Famke Janssen, who I think was most famous up to that point for playing in the GoldenEye movie as one of the evil women. And she was great as Jean Grey. I think the first movie, not a lot to say about the rest of the cast, I don't really think.
I'll just say something about Halle Berry real quick, because I am one of the people who didn't really love this casting, and you know what? I don't hate her in X-Men 1. Like you said, she did have an accent, and she was closer to comic book Storm than she was in any of the films. But she's not very dominating on screen. And to me, Storm has a very dominating presence, so that's. I'm not a huge fan of her in this for that reason. Right. But as the films go on, I just do not care for her performances at all.
And I think that's a shared response from fans. I don't think we're in the minority there. But I do think that's the writing more than Halle Berry's fault. I mean, she's a brilliant actress. So I do think that was just the lack of stock by Fox and Storm, who could have easily been a strong supporting character if she'd been given more attention and writing. But it is what it is.
Yeah, she's one of those actresses that I can't quite. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of hers, but she's won an Oscar, so I can't. Yeah.
So moving on, we have Famke Janssen played Jean Grey, who would show more acting chops in later films. But for the first one, she did the standard Jean Grey, telekinetic, caught in the middle between Cyclops and Wolverine. They played that dynamic really well. She looked like you would expect Jean Grey to look.
I really like Famke Janssen. I haven't got anything bad to say at all. Like, when we get to X3, I'll talk about how much I liked her in that. But I mean, she's I really like her Jean Grey. Once again, she doesn't get to do a whole lot, but what she does get to do is Jean to me.
So I don't think we have enough time to talk about the rest of the cast, but I think we covered the main points. So let's talk about what didn't you like about the first X-Men film?
My problem with the film is mainly with the Brotherhood. I like the characters that they selected, but once again, they had very little dialogue, and I mean, they're great in the action scenes, and Sabretooth looks great, and Mystique obviously looks great, and she gets to do a lot more in the next film. But they're three characters with very little dialogue who are there for the fight scenes, and I mean, X2 gets away from that, so it kind of makes up for it. But as a standalone film, one of my things is that the actual Brotherhood characters don't get to do a whole lot other than fight.
Right. Yeah, I was disappointed in the first film. And again, they were balancing a lot. So the fact that they handled as much Brotherhood as they did, I think, should be acknowledged.
Yes.
But I would have liked to have Magneto be more of than just like a gang leader, which is how he felt in the first film. It's just him and his thugs, the Brotherhood. And I would have liked to have seen more of a dark family dynamic. I mean, it really is the mirror to Xavier's X-Men. They are loyal to Xavier because he rescued them. And in a doppelganger type of way, Magneto rescues these mutants from society, except instead of talking about fitting in and working with peace and accepting who you are, he brainwashes them into his method of thinking by saying, no, we need to kill humans who get in our way, and it's about mutant superiority, and I'm the one with the best plans, and I can help you. Just help me fulfill my goals. So I wish they would have played a little bit more with that, maybe had lines between Magneto and Mystique, since I don't think any other character would have really worked to really show that aspect.
Yeah, because Mystique has one line, which, but I mean, I completely agree. And that's the thing. Magneto was done incredibly well, but that is the thing that he does. He is Magneto and the bad guys. It's I mean, for people who aren't X-Men fans, they're probably going, oh, what was that character's name for Toad or for Sabretooth and that? Because the X-Men names get over again. But I mean, not the Brotherhood.
Yeah. They did it. The movie, they really narrowed it down to a few characters. When I think that they could have had more of an ensemble, and there's some characters you don't have to have dramatic dialogue every single time. But sometimes I wonder what movie it would have been like if they made it a little more of. And it led to this in future movies, but if they had it be more than just like 4-on-4 or 3-on-3, and actually made it more of a this is what I have now, but I actually have a lot of people on standby. I have an army behind me. I think it was a good introduction for just introducing it in like not having a gigantic X-Men team or a gigantic Brotherhood and building to that. Even though they kind of established the possibility of things have happened in the past, and who's to say that we haven't had a huge war before this point, or will have one after this point. It was great to start it kind of in the middle.
Yeah. One of the other things, some fans are very divided on this, and I feel like fans are now more negative on it. But is Rogue in this film?
Ah, yes.
You know what? In this film, I like what they did with Rogue. It definitely feels more like a combination of Jubilee and Kitty Pryde, but with Rogue's powers. But I mean, I like her relationship with Wolverine. I liked her relationship with Iceman.
Even though Rogue does have a bit of an romantic undertones with Wolverine, which are very obvious in the first film. And romantic undertones or like a paternal type thing going on with Wolverine. I don't know, but I thought it did work for the first movie. I thought it was played out in X2 and X-Men 3. But for the first film, I think that choosing Rogue, instead of Kitty Pryde or Jubilee, you're choosing a character that fans are definitely going to be more familiar with. And even average moviegoers who've seen the cartoon, they're like, oh yeah, Rogue, okay, the girl who can fly and the white streak in her hair. I recognize her. So you have a character that people recognize a lot more, which probably allows them to connect a lot quicker to Rogue. And she plays the center, who we're on her journey experiencing this weird world while she's discovering her powers. And the power itself of touching anyone, she has to be very secluded. I think Bryan Singer said that he chose Rogue to be the center of his story because her power kind of sums up the story itself. Being alone and not being able to get close to anybody because of the danger. So,
yeah, I remember before the film coming out, people saying how great it would be to be a mutant and stuff like that. And having Rogue as the centerpiece is really smart because it shows, these guys have some problems. Not all of their powers are easy to deal with. I mean, you got Wolverine who can never die, and people saying, how's that a bad thing? And then you got but it's still, how much has he seen? And, you got Cyclops, he can't look at anyone with his naked eyes. But Rogue is a character that, your heart really goes out for, And
especially since she actually dies a couple times and is able to come back to life. And the movie does a really great job pulling you in and actually instead of having a character who just, oh, I can't die, I'll just, I'll be okay, they actually pull a few emotional strings and actually care about Rogue and wonder, oh, is this really it? And don't have Rogue be the strong superwoman that she is in the comics and in the animated series, and instead have her be the teenage person still exploring her powers. That is it's a double-edged sword in that, or it's bittersweet, I should say, in that it has a great center for the story to thrive off of, and for the emotions to come through with Anna Paquin, who's a pretty good actress on her own right.
Yeah.
But you don't really get to see the strong, snappy, witty Rogue that people like to see with a southern accent, which is played off a little bit, but really toned down. And she never flies, never does anything like that. But I think that's a bit nitpicky. But you don't get to see that type of Rogue that people, I think, would have really liked to have seen or hint at. I think even in the end of the first movie, you don't actually see her character grow into the strong Rogue that people like to see. They just have this broken woman who's scared and alone be in a place where people understand her, but that's her story. That's where they leave off. They don't actually have her hint at being like, oh, I'm going to be an X-Man or something. It's just she is pretty vulnerable from beginning to end and continues to be.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said earlier about the romantic undertones with Wolverine and Rogue, because I've never thought of that. I mean, I get that they say, Jean says she's a little taken with you.
Yeah.
But I sort of took that as more of a young girl, infatuated with this, the rugged hero of the story. But, right. I mean, the romance that really ticks me off in this is Jean and Wolverine, because there is absolutely no reason why his heart belongs to her. Mm-hmm. I mean, he nearly stabbed her in the face. He nearly killed her when they first met. She read his mind and, saw him with his shirt off. And apparently that's enough for Wolverine.
Well, they like the bad boy, so.
The only reason it's there is because it's in the comics. And he's the story and he's got to get the girl. And, does get the girl in the end. But, I mean, it's... I just have a lot of problems with it because the only reason it is there is because it exists in the comics. Yeah. And... that they don't spend enough time with Scott, with Scott and Jean, to the point where no one questions why people are rooting for Wolverine to steal Jean Grey away from Cyclops.
Yeah, it's just a convoluted love triangle with no clear person you're exactly rooting for, other than the story is telling you, okay, well, Wolverine's our main guy, so you should vote for him instead of Cyclops, who's just the generic Boy Scout who's doing everything right, which, we'll get into that later. But, the story itself didn't really didn't do anything really interesting with that love triangle, other than it being a plot point for Wolverine.
Yeah, that is my only, that honestly is my biggest problem with the film. But, as far as anything else, I can't really think of much. I like what's done with Senator Kelly.
That was fun. I think the love triangle, that's a great place to transition into X-Men 2, which is a big part of the film. In X-Men 2, what they mainly focus on are three aspects. They delve a little deeper into the love triangle with Wolverine, Scott, and Jean Grey. And the two aspects that they deal with the most are Wolverine's backstory, which was handled the best out of any film, and the war between humans and mutants that was hinted at the end of the first film. And that ending in the first film gave me chills, by the way, because, like I said, it left possibilities open for wars that have happened in the past and the war that will happen in the future. So it left a great spot for a franchise.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole line of, the war is still coming and unprepared to fight it by any means necessary I will always be there, old friend. It's such a great ending, and I'm so glad that was the ending. There's nothing, there's no stinger at the end of the credits or anything. Obviously, that precedes, every Marvel movie having something at the end of the credits. But I mean, the other X-Men films, the 2 and 3 anyway, they do the thing where